Outside, Phil is at last making real progress with his stone wall.
Ah, Mick.
Yeah.
Come and have a look at this. I've been taking out all this brick rubble, which must be what they must have shifted in the 60s.
Yeah.
And look, in the side of their trench, look what I've got. Look, this beautiful mortar floor.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So it must be under this lump in the corner here, then?
Well, yeah, I mean, it probably goes all the way that way.
A room with a proper plaster floor in it, then?
Well, exactly. I mean, that unquestionably is in the building.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
the big question, of course, is whether or not this wall is the outside of the building or whether it's an internal partition.
Yeah.
What do you make of it, Chris?
Yes, I think we're certainly inside a fairly substantial Roman building here.
I told Tony we were going to throw a 6 today.
3 days ago, this was our starting point. A map of stone walls joined together by archaeologists and historians in a way that suggested a very big bath complex in this area. We now know that they were wrong. Most of these walls weren't even Roman, except for this one. But then, just when we thought that was it... Bridge, things starting to come together in your trench?
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. Look, we've got a Roman ditch coming up here.
Yeah.
Just uncover what looks like a Roman post hole, and the piece de resistance is this piece of daub.
Daub as in wattle and daub?
Yeah.
So where would the wattle have gone?
2 pieces would have fitted just in there.
It is extraordinary how things always start to come together towards the end of day 3. And it being day 3, we've got, as usual, 3/4 of the local population. But what's so strange is that in addition to all the things that we've got in Bridget's trench, in Matt's trench, we've got something similar. What have you got for us?
Well, we're down on the bottom clay floor here, and if you look really carefully, you can see these circular, evenly spaced stains, and that's where wooden stakes would have been, and they'd have held up a small wall, a partition wall, or something like that.
So there is Roman here. It's just much more ephemeral than we thought it would be. It's wattle and daub and mud and post holes. It's not made of stone. The post holes in this trench are Roman, and they explain why we haven't found much. It's all gone. What we're left with is one wall and some floor.
Phil, I've seen loads of walls on this dig, but that is the only one I'd label as Roman.
I know, it's a cracker, isn't it?
It's terrific.
Absolutely cracker. And I mean, we got the inside and the outside. But the really nice thing, what do you think of that? I reckon that's a tessera.
You know what? I think you're right. You've got the flat surface on the top here. You've got the mortar around these sides here. But I do think it's been broken off on that side, so it should really be square like that. But I don't think I can recreate a brilliant mythological scene on a mosaic pavement out of that.
If that is a tessera, it means absolutely cast iron. We got a mosaic floor in this building.
No, it doesn't. It means we've got a tessellated pavement, probably of one colour, like down a corridor.
OK, that to me is a mosaic.
Well, but you don't get brightly coloured mosaics usually in a military context, but I would expect this kind of thing in a slightly higher status building with somebody who wants to be comfortable. And I think that fits with a lot of the stuff we've got here. Those stories about the baths or heated rooms here, I think that does fit with it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Helen, 3 days in sunny North Wales. What have you come up with?
Me, I've been in charge of finding nothing. I've had the most important places in the village, the scheduled ancient monuments. I found nothing in one and I found nothing in the other. So I've been sent to the chicken run, and there I did finally manage to find something. So I became an expert on local Roman mortaria as well as the natural.
Phil?
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm over the moon. I mean, we came looking for a bathhouse, and it's always nice to be able to put the record straight. We now know that there is no bathhouse. And then to cap it all, we've been able to confirm some of their results, which was this wonderful stone-built wing of a Roman building, tessellated floor, lovely floors. It's been, stonker, it really has.
What a great optimist you are.
I am!
What is it that we've got?
What we've got is a whole complex of buildings here. Quite what it is more difficult to interpret because it's clearly not a Roman villa, and neither is it something like a Roman fort. Well, Stuart came up with the idea that this is actually the nearest supply of limestone to Chester. And why that's important is you need vast amounts of limestone to make lime for the mortar and the plaster and everything when you're building the permanent fort there. And you'd need a gang of labourers basically to do that. So we probably ought to think of this as some sort of industrial military compound of people who are producing all that material to send back over to Chester, and I quite like that idea.
Meanwhile, there are some exciting developments over the water. We've removed the chancel wall to reveal the grave Bridge found this morning and discovered it's potentially the earliest thing we found on the mainland.
The edge of the grave appears to be running along here. And as you can see, it's in a completely different alignment to this wall. So it's obviously going to be much earlier than this, but how much earlier is difficult to tell.
But what is interesting is that, you see, I saw these slates here, now tracking them back to establish whether it is actually a floor. And it looks like in this section, starting to get masonry, perhaps with a wall. And that's more on the right alignment to be associated with the alignment of these burials.
But the other nice thing about that bit of flooring is it's at the same level that that reliquary box is.
It looks like we're heading further back into the time of the Cornish saints, because the latest theory is that our burial and reliquary are from an even earlier chapel than the one Oliver found, which Glastonbury probably revamped by adding a chancel. And if so, pilgrims could have been coming to pay their respects to relics in this box long before Glastonbury's time. This is now legally and officially a hoard. Pretty good trench, Mick.
It is. I think it's very interesting that the top layer's got this Roman stuff in it, because it suggests perhaps that that's the end of the life of the ditch, and it's actually a lot earlier than that.
What, prehistoric?
Well, it could be. I mean, it's an oval, of course, which is the sort of shape you'd get in prehistory, and I wonder if it's not a prehistoric ditch around a prehistoric settlement somewhere on this hilltop.
With our little chapel plonked in the middle later on.
That's the intriguing thing. They've then used the enclosure. They probably a slight ditch and bank, and they've used that as the enclosure around the church. That's fantastic.
All this is more evidence that the chapel had early origins, and Phil's beginning to get an idea of just what an enormous undertaking it was to construct a chapel on top of the island.
So I can't get over digging down in here is just how much they've used the natural geology to really make the chapel stand out. Look, you've got solid bedrock over there, and look, I'm down over a metre down here, no bedrock. I think the ground must plummet away. This wall is right on the edge of the natural.
So they'd been right on the top of the hill. They could have seen the whole coastline and be seen as well, I guess.
That's right. But of course, because they've sited it here, they've had to make massive foundations, and they even splay out here to take the main thrust of the chancel. It's fascinating. It's a hell of a piece of engineering, I tell you.
These are medieval sherds of pulp. One's actually got a little spot of glazing, so that helps me a little bit. I think these are mid to late 13th century.
So how does that fit into the history of the island and this chapel, Nicholas?
Well, the late 13th century is when Glastonbury is giving up this site and bringing the monks back. But it's possible that this is one of the last monks or priors of the place. And if it's not that, it's the Lord or Lady of the Manor. It's clearly a very important grave. It's being excavated out of the rock. It's at a pole position in the church.
And Matt's burial isn't alone. Just as we're packing up, outside the west end of the chapel, Ian's found what looks like a kissed burial. But you're going to be staying here anyway, aren't you? So will you let us know at some time what it was?
Sure.
Cheers. Matt, we've got to go, like, now.
OK, let's go.
Even as we're loading onto the boat, another kissed burial emerges from under the south wall. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, Tiny.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, you're welcome.
It's beginning to look like this enclosure could have been a burial ground for thousands of years, maybe even into prehistory. Over the last few days, we've discovered that the story of our two chapels began long before Glastonbury's monks arrived, when Looe Island could well have been one of the earliest outposts of Christianity. And a chapel on the top would have been a beacon of hope for traders from the Mediterranean crossing formidable seas. Sometime later, another chapel was built on the mainland, at the same height, looking to the island, with our reliquary box at the altar for pilgrims to visit. And eventually, in the 12th century, Glastonbury's monks rebuilt both the chapels as a sort of St. Michael theme park. Over the last 3 days, we've just scratched the surface of this magical island, which has been a very special place going way back long before Christianity. Stuart and Elaine's bid to unravel the mysteries of the estate has revealed that the bulk of Francis Popham's budget went on constructing a vast lake and planting thousands of trees to create a series of impressive views of the mansion.
By the time we get here, instead of being enclosed by the trees, it's like the curtains of a theatre have opened now, and look what happens. You're going to go, wow, that's fantastic.
The second viewpoint is the angle from which the watercolour of the grand eastern facade was painted.
What you've got now is a perfect picture frame with overhanging boughs from the trees here on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side will be other screen of trees.
The carriageway would then have swept the visitor round to see the main entrance.
Would have seen the portico, and sweeping off to the other side you would have seen acres of the family's land and their sheep and their animals. Would have been very impressive.
It would, wouldn't it? And this is really important for the archaeology, because to achieve the effect they wanted, all they have to do is rebuild the east wing and the north wing. They don't need to do anything behind, because the visitors won't see that. You could keep the medieval buildings and they could function perfectly well.
And unlike today, Georgian visitors simply didn't wander round the back, so there was no need to rebuild the service quarters and stables.
All that's typical of the 17th century. In the smart rooms, it might be coloured with tapestry. Down here, those cheap materials are well done for the kitchen staff.
Seems to me that after 3 days, we haven't discovered a Georgian mansion at all.
150 years after this was built, the Georgians slapped a bit of lipstick on it. That's basically it.
So it's a bit of Georgian cladding?
Yeah.
So Francis Popham's doomed grand design turns out to be the last flourish of a family intent on building ever more impressive houses. Sir John Popham acquired Hunstrete's medieval manor around 1600 and constructed a new house befitting a Lord Chief Justice. But around the time of the Civil War, the next generation of Pophams built another house, the one we've uncovered. And over a century later, Francis spent a fortune refacing the outside of the house, lavishly remodelling the inside and transforming Hunstrete's gardens. But to finish it was too expensive a proposition for his nephew, who eventually pulled it down and moved into the lodge.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.